Picture the most powerful nation on Earth. A country that once ruled nearly a quarter of the entire world. A country that gave us Shakespeare, Newton, Darwin, Churchill. A country whose buildings, its palaces, its cathedrals, its towers of stone, are so breathtaking that millions of people fly across entire oceans just to stand in front of them and stare. Now imagine that behind almost every single one of those buildings is a story that has been quietly buried. A story of obsession and financial ruin. Of a man who was banned from ever entering the palace he designed. Of a fire so catastrophic it was visible for 30 miles. Of a one-eyed Irish outlaw who walked into the most guarded vault in England, flattened the king's crown with a mallet, and stuffed the royal orb down his trousers. And of an architect who deceived the King of England, defied every single order he was given, and quietly built something so magnificent that it became the most recognized silhouette in the world. And he did it right under their noses for 35 years without anyone being able to stop him. They said it was just stone and mortar. But every single one of these buildings has a story buried inside its walls. A story of obsession, of betrayal, of power, and in at least one case, a crime that changed Britain forever. This is not a tour. This is the truth they never carved into the plaques. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We are going inside 5 of the most magnificent buildings ever constructed on British soil. Blenheim Palace, the gift from a grateful nation that nearly destroyed the man it was meant to honor. The Palace of Westminster, reduced to rubble by the most bureaucratically absurd fire in human history. The Tower of London, a fortress that held queens, traitors, and the crown jewels, and almost lost all 3. Castle Howard in Yorkshire, designed by a man with no architectural training whatsoever, and which became one of the most imitated buildings on Earth. And St. Paul's Cathedral, where Christopher Wren, a man who began his career as an astronomer, quietly rewrote his own royal commission in real time, built something entirely different from what he was given permission to build, and dared anyone to tear it down. Stay until the end, because the last one is the one nobody talks about, and it might be the most extraordinary act of creative defiance in the entire history of British architecture. Here is what you need to understand before we begin. Every building in this documentary was supposed to be a symbol of power, a statement, a show of force. Whether it was the power of a victorious general, or the power of the crown, or the power of the church, every single one of these structures was built to say something. But behind the stone and the grandeur, behind the tapestries and the gilded ceilings, behind every magnificent facade, there is a human being who paid a price most people will never know about. And in some cases, those human beings were erased from the story entirely. We are going to ask 3 questions throughout this film. The first, who really built these places, and what did it cost them? The second, what happened inside these walls that the official story leaves out? And the third, why does Britain still worship these buildings, even when the truth beneath them is as complicated and as dark as anything you will find in a history book? We are going to answer all 3. Let's start at the beginning. Let's start at Blenheim. It is August the 13th, 1704, and the armies of Europe are exhausted. For years, the continent has been burning. The War of the Spanish Succession, a conflict over who would inherit the throne of Spain, has dragged in almost every major power, and France under Louis XIV is winning. France is always winning. But on a single day, in a small village in what is now southern Germany called Blenheim, John Churchill, the first Duke of Marlborough, does something that changes everything. He defeats the French and Bavarian armies so completely, so decisively, that it is later said his victory changed the political axis of the world. The French lose over 30,000 men in a single day. It is the most catastrophic defeat France has suffered in half a century. And Queen Anne of England, sitting in her palace at London, decides that this man, this general, deserves a reward unlike anything Britain has ever offered before. She would give him a palace. Not just any palace, not a townhouse or a modest estate. She would commission something that would stand for centuries as a monument to his glory, a monument so vast and so extraordinary that it would rival Versailles itself. Parliament voted £240,000 toward its construction. That is a sum equivalent to tens of millions in today's money. The land it would sit on, The former royal manor of Woodstock in Oxfordshire was given to the Churchill family outright. The rent they would pay for it? Once a year, on the anniversary of the Battle of Blenheim, they were to deliver a copy of the French royal flag to the monarch. That tradition holds to this day, and the man chosen to design this monument, this celebration of military supremacy, was one of the most unlikely architectural choices in British history. John Vanbrugh was a playwright. That is not a metaphor. He genuinely was a playwright. He had written comedies for the London stage. He had no formal architectural training. He had never designed a significant building in his life. And yet the Duke of Marlborough, by some accounts after a chance meeting at a London playhouse, commissioned him on the spot to build what would become Blenheim Palace, one of the greatest Baroque masterpieces ever constructed on English soil. It was a decision that would cause years of chaos, bitter personal feuds, financial catastrophe, and one of the most extraordinary betrayals in British architectural history. But before we get to that, we need to understand how Vanbrugh had come to be trusted with something this enormous in the first place. Because the answer begins not at Blenheim, but in Yorkshire. Castle Howard stands in the Vale of York in North Yorkshire, and it is an astonishing thing. It has appeared in films and television series for decades. Its silhouette, a central dome, sweeping Baroque wings, stone colonnades stretching across the landscape, is so dramatic that visitors who see it for the first time often stop the car. But here's what most people do not know. When the third Earl of Carlisle, Charles Howard, decided he wanted to build a grand house on his Yorkshire estate in 1699, the original architect appointed to the project was a man called William Talman. Talman was the professional. He was the establishment choice. He was also, by all accounts, an extraordinarily difficult person to work with, arrogant, demanding, and prone to falling out with his clients in spectacular fashion. And that is exactly what happened. Talman was fired, and in his place, the Earl of Carlisle turned to the same John Vanbrugh, the playwright, who had never formally designed anything in his life, but who was now, impossibly, being handed one of the most ambitious architectural commissions in England. The architectural establishment in London was outraged. Who was this man? What gave him the right to design something of this scale? What Vanbrugh lacked in training, he compensated for with sheer dramatic instinct. He understood how a building should feel. He understood that architecture was not just about structure. It was about experience, about arrival, about the emotion a building created in the body of the person walking toward it. He worked alongside the brilliant Nicholas Hawksmoor, a trained architect who understood the technical demands that Vanbrugh could not always satisfy, and together the two of them produced Castle Howard, a building so bold, so theatrical, so unlike anything that had been built in England before that it became a sensation. It was one of England's first houses in the grand European Baroque style, and the man who said he could do it, the playwright with no credentials, had proved every single one of his critics wrong. Which is why, when the Duke of Marlborough was looking for someone to build his monument to glory, Castle Howard was the proof he needed. If Vanbrugh could do that in Yorkshire, imagine what he could do on a blank canvas in Oxfordshire. Construction at Blenheim began in 1705, and from the very first day, it was a disaster. The Duchess of Marlborough, Sarah Churchill, had wanted Sir Christopher Wren, the most celebrated architect in England, to design the palace. She was overruled. She despised Vanbrugh personally, despised his extravagance, despised the scale of what he was building, and made her contempt absolutely clear. She repeatedly described the palace as impossibly large and impractical. She had wanted a comfortable country house. What Vanbrugh was building was a monument, and the distinction mattered enormously, because those two visions were fundamentally incompatible. The Duchess meddled, interfered, countermanded orders, and made Vanbrugh's life miserable. The poet Alexander Pope, after visiting Blenheim, famously wrote, "Thanks, sir," cried I. "'Tis very fine, but where do you sleep, or where d'ye dine? I find by all you have been telling that 'tis a house, but not a dwelling." The battles between Vanbrugh and Sarah Churchill became as legendary as the building itself. And yet, despite everything, the palace rose. Stone by stone, hall by hall, the most magnificent non-royal residence in all of England was taking shape. And then, suddenly, the money stopped. By 1712, the Marlboroughs had fallen from political favor. Queen and had turned on them. The friendship between Sarah Churchill and the Queen had collapsed completely. Sources at the time suggest the final rupture was partly over the house itself, partly over politics, and partly over the simple fact that two enormously strong-willed women had finally run out of patience with each other. And with the fall from favor came the end of royal funding. The Crown's financial commitment to Blenheim was severed. The craftsmen working on the site had not been paid for work already completed. The Duke of Marlborough was now personally liable for a construction bill that was spiraling toward £300,000, equivalent to roughly £25 million in today's money. He continued anyway. He borrowed. He lobbied. He fought. And in 1714, he and the Duchess returned from a period of self-imposed exile on the very day after Queen Anne died. Construction resumed, and John Vanbrugh eventually completed his masterpiece, only to be banned by Sarah Churchill from ever stepping foot on the property to see it. The man who designed Blenheim Palace was refused entry to Blenheim Palace. He and his wife tried to visit after it opened to the public in 1725. They were turned away at the gate. Whatever Vanbrugh felt in that moment, standing outside the building that had consumed years of his life, we can only imagine. We move now to London. It is the evening of October the 16th, 1834. The city is going about its business. Parliament is not in session. The Palace of Westminster, the medieval complex that has served as the home of the British Parliament since the 13th century, is relatively quiet. And in the basement of the House of Lords, two workmen are doing what they have been told to do. They are burning tally sticks. Tally sticks were pieces of wood, usually willow, notched to record payments and debts. They were a medieval accounting system, ancient even by 1834, and they had not been formally used since 1826. But the Exchequer had accumulated 2 entire cartloads of them, sitting in storage, and someone had finally decided they needed to go. Instead of giving them away to local families to use as firewood, which would have been the sensible solution, the solution that any remotely intelligent person might have suggested, an official decision was made to burn them in the furnaces beneath the House of Lords. The furnaces had been designed to burn coal. Coal gives off a high heat with relatively little flame. Wood is different. Wood burns hot and high. And the workmen, over the course of the afternoon, fed so much dry old timber into those stoves that the furnaces became dangerously overloaded. The heat melted the copper lining of the flues. A chimney fire started, and it spread into the surrounding woodwork hidden behind the walls and floors of the House of Lords chamber above. During the afternoon, a party of visitors being shown around the House of Lords became puzzled. The floor was unusually warm. There was smoke seeping through it. The workmen told them not to worry, they were just burning some old sticks. The furnaces were shut down at 5 in the evening. The deputy housekeeper, Mrs. Wright, decided everything was fine and locked up the premises. At 6 o'clock, she heard the terrified wife of a doorkeeper screaming. The House of Lords was on fire. Within minutes, the flames had spread to the rest of the palace. By 7 in the evening, the superintendent of the London fire engine establishment, a man named James Braidwood, arrived with 12 fire engines and 64 men. By the middle of the evening, it was already clear the fire was uncontrollable in most of the palace. The ancient buildings, crammed with medieval timber, connected by corridors without fire stops or party walls, burned with extraordinary speed. The fire developed into the largest conflagration London had seen since the Great Fire of 1666, a blaze bigger than anything the city would see again until the Blitz of the Second World War. Crowds gathered along the River Thames in their thousands. The flames reflected off the water and lit up all of central London. And among the crowds watching from the riverbank that night were some extraordinary witnesses. The painter John Constable was there. Charles Dickens, then working as a parliamentary reporter, witnessed the event. And the greatest landscape painter Britain ever produced, J.M.W. Turner, reportedly took a boat out onto the Thames and watched the inferno from the water, making sketches. He would go on to paint the fire in 2 of the most famous works in the history of British art, capturing the terrible beauty of the palace burning against the night sky. By morning, the damage was catastrophic. The House of Lords was gone. The House of Commons was gone. The Painted Chamber, the committee rooms, the Speaker's house, all of it destroyed. £2 million worth of damage to an uninsured building. And the cause of it all? 2 cartloads of old wooden sticks. Prime Minister Viscount Melbourne later described it as one of the greatest instances of stupidity upon record. No one was prosecuted. No one was charged. No one paid for it in any way except the British taxpayer, who would spend the next 30 years paying for a replacement that would become the most recognized building in the world. What came next from those ashes was something nobody had planned for. A competition was held to design a new parliament. 97 entries were submitted. The rules were strict. The new building had to be in either the Gothic or the Elizabethan style. Britain was, consciously or not, deciding what it was, defining its own identity through architecture at a moment of enormous political change. The Reform Act of 1832 had already begun to reshape the country's political system. The new parliament would need to reflect a new Britain. The winning entry, identified by a portcullis symbol, number 64 in the competition, belonged to Charles Barry. Barry was an accomplished architect whose previous work had been primarily classical and Italian at the Manchester City Art Gallery, the Reform Club in London. He was not, by instinct or training, a Gothic architect, and yet he had won the competition. And to solve the problem of the Gothic interiors, he turned to a man who would become the true creative genius behind the Palace of Westminster, a man whose name most people today do not know. Even though they walk past his greatest work every single time they see a photograph of London. Augustus Welby Northmore Pugin was born in London in 1812. His father was a French draftsman who ran a school of architectural drawing from the family home, which meant that from his earliest years, Pugin absorbed a depth of knowledge about medieval architecture that most formally trained architects never acquired. He traveled Europe extensively and was intoxicated by the great Gothic cathedrals, their detail, their intricacy, their moral seriousness. He came to believe, with genuine religious fervor, that Gothic architecture was not just a style, but a statement about the right way to live. He converted to Catholicism at the age of 22. He was, by every account, a man of ferocious energy, radical conviction, and extraordinary gifts. Gifts that Charles Barry desperately needed. Barry and Pugin had already worked together before the Westminster Commission. When Barry won the contract in January 1836, Pugin was brought in to provide designs for the internal decorations and furnishings in the Gothic style. What followed was one of the most consequential creative partnerships and one of the most troubling credit disputes in the history of British architecture. Pugin did not just design some of the decorative elements. He designed the wallpaper. He designed the furniture. He designed the gas lamps and the umbrella stands. He created the tiles, the metalwork, the stained glass, the carved stonework, the fabric patterns. He essentially designed everything you see when you look at the interior of the Palace of Westminster, the richly detailed, ornate, medieval-feeling environment that makes the building feel unlike anything else in the world. Charles Barry designed the overall layout, the floor plan, the classical structural skeleton. But the soul of the building, the thing that makes it feel like it belongs to 700 years of English history, was Augustus Pugin. And the clock tower, the tower that houses Big Ben, the most recognizable structure in Britain, perhaps in the entire world, was designed by Augustus Pugin. Pugin himself wrote, at the time Charles Barry made his last visit to collect the designs, "I never worked so hard in my life for Mr. Barry, for tomorrow I render all the designs for finishing his bell tower, and it is beautiful." Those are his words. It is beautiful. He knew what he had created. The design was Pugin's last great work before the final collapse of his health. He died on the 14th of September, 1852. He was 40 years old. He had designed at least 70 buildings, designed the interior of the most famous parliamentary building in the world, written landmark books on architectural theory, designed furniture for Windsor Castle, converted to Catholicism, been married 3 times, and raised 6 children. He had crammed what contemporaries described as 15 years of work into the final 4. He died in Bethlehem Royal Hospital, the very institution whose name gave us the word Bedlam, having suffered a complete mental breakdown. The precise cause of his collapse is still debated by historians. Some believe it was simply the catastrophic overwork. Others point to the possibility of mercury poisoning from materials he worked with. Whatever the cause, Augustus Pugin, the man who designed the clock tower housing Big Ben, died in an asylum, largely uncredited, largely unknown to the general public, at the age of 40. For over a century after his death, the popular history of the Palace of Westminster gave Charles Barry the credit and almost forgot Pugin entirely. The building that stands on the north bank of the Thames, the Gothic masterpiece with its towers and pinnacles and elaborate stonework, the building whose silhouette defines the London skyline, the building whose clock has marked the time for the entire world, was shaped in its soul by a young Catholic convert who died in a mental hospital at 40, who never received the public recognition he deserved in his lifetime, and whose greatest creation stands as the most visited Parliament building on Earth. Now we come to the Tower of London, and we need to dispense with something immediately. You think you know this place. You think you know about the executions, about Anne Boleyn, about the yeoman warders in their Tudor uniforms, about the ravens. You have probably seen photographs. You may even have visited. But the story of the Tower of London that most people carry around with them is a sanitized, simplified, tourist-friendly version of a place that was, for centuries, the most politically charged building in England. A palace, a prison, an armory, a treasury, a place of execution, and the vault that held the most valuable objects in the kingdom. And in 1671, it nearly lost those objects completely, because a one-eyed Irishman named Colonel Thomas Blood walked in dressed as a priest and almost walked out with the crown jewels in his trousers. Thomas Blood was born in County Meath, Ireland, around 1618. He came from a family of some standing. His grandfather had been a member of Parliament. He had fought in the English Civil War, switching sides when it became clear that Oliver Cromwell was going to win, which tells you everything you need to know about Thomas Blood's relationship with loyalty. Cromwell rewarded him with land and a position as a justice of the peace. When Charles II was restored to the throne in 1660, Blood lost his lands, fled to Ireland, and almost immediately began plotting against the new regime. He attempted to seize Dublin Castle. He attempted to abduct and murder the Duke of Ormond in the streets of London. He had a bounty on his head of £1,000. He was one of the most wanted men in England. And somehow, through a combination of disguise, nerve, and what one contemporary described as dangerously insinuating charm, he was never caught. By the spring of 1671, Blood had set his sights on something altogether more audacious: the crown jewels of England. At this time, Charles II had allowed the crown jewels to be displayed to members of the public for a viewing fee, under the care of a custodian named Talbot Edwards, who lived with his family in the Martin Tower at the Tower of London. Security, by modern standards, was almost unimaginably relaxed, and Blood was a man who understood how to exploit the gap between appearances and reality better than almost anyone alive. He arrived at the tower disguised as an Anglican clergyman, a parson, in the language of the time, accompanied by a woman posing as his wife. While viewing the jewels, his wife feigned a sudden illness. The jewel keeper's wife, a kind woman named Mrs. Edwards, invited them upstairs to recover in the family apartment. Blood expressed his warmest gratitude and left. Over the following days and weeks, he returned. He brought gifts. He cultivated a genuine friendship with Talbot Edwards and his wife. He even arranged, with great apparent care, a proposed marriage between his nephew, one of his confederates, and the Edwards' unmarried daughter. He was playing a long game, and he was playing it brilliantly. On the morning of May the 9th, 1671, Blood arrived at the tower with 3 companions. He told the 77-year-old Talbot Edwards that he would like to show the jewels to his nephew and 2 friends while they waited for a dinner that Mrs. Edwards was preparing. Edwards unlocked the metal door and led them down to the jewel room. The door closed. A cloak was thrown over Edwards. He was struck with a mallet, knocked to the floor, bound, gagged, and stabbed in the stomach to keep him quiet. Blood flattened the imperial state crown with the mallet so he could hide it beneath his clerical coat. The royal orb was stuffed inside Blood's trousers. One of his confederates, his brother-in-law, Robert Perrot, tried to saw the scepter in half because it was too long to conceal. And then, entirely by chance, everything went wrong. Talbot Edwards regained consciousness. He had been beaten, stabbed, and bound, and he was 77 years old, and he regained consciousness and began to shout at the top of his lungs, "Murder! Treason!" At the same moment, his son, a soldier named with Edwards, arrived at the tower on unexpected leave from his regiment in Flanders, accompanied by a friend named Captain Beckman. Blood and his men ran. They dropped the scepter. There was a chase through the tower grounds, pistol shots fired, swords drawn, and Blood was eventually captured at the Iron Gate. He was taken into custody, and the crown jewels, the crown somewhat battered from the mallet, the orb retrieved from inside Blood's clothing, were returned to the vault. What happened next has puzzled historians for 3.5 centuries. Thomas Blood, captured red-handed in the act of stealing the crown jewels, having previously attempted to murder a duke and seize Dublin Castle, refused to answer questions from anyone other than King Charles II personally. And King Charles II agreed to see him. In private, nobody knows exactly what was said during that meeting. What we know is what happened afterward. Blood emerged from the meeting with a full royal pardon, a pardon for every crime he had ever committed, not just the attempted theft of the jewels. And he was granted an annual income of £500 from Irish lands. A man who had tried to steal the crown jewels, who had a £1,000 bounty on his head, who had attempted to murder a peer of the realm, walked out of a private meeting with the King of England a free man with a pension. The diarist John Evelyn wrote that he could never understand how Blood came to be pardoned and even received into favor. He called Blood's crimes the boldest attempt and the only treason of this sort that was ever pardoned. Some historians have speculated that Blood was already working as a spy or double agent for the crown, that the heist itself may have been an inside job, that Charles II needed intelligence from the nonconformist community that only a man with Blood's connections could provide. Others have suggested, more dramatically, that the cash-strapped Charles II was in on the whole scheme, planning to steal his own jewels, pocket the money from their sale, and buy replacement regalia at public expense. To this day, nobody knows for certain. What we do know is this: Thomas Blood, the man who flattened the crown of England with a mallet, spent his remaining years as a familiar figure at the royal court, appearing at state functions, working occasionally as an informant for the government, dying in debt in 1680. And when he died, the authorities dug up his body to make sure he hadn't faked his own death. We have saved the most extraordinary story for last. And to understand it fully, you need to go back to September the 2nd, 1666. The Great Fire of London has been burning for 4 days. It has consumed an area of the city roughly 373 acres in size. It has destroyed 87 churches. It has gutted the old medieval Cathedral of St. Paul's so completely that the lead from its roof melted and ran in rivers through the surrounding streets. When the fire finally died, a city of 500,000 people was standing in the ruins of its own history. And Christopher Wren, a 33-year-old professor of astronomy at Oxford University, a man who was not yet an architect, who had never built anything of significant scale, looked at those ruins and saw the greatest opportunity in the history of English architecture. Wren had been born in 1632. His father had been Dean of Windsor. He had grown up around power, around the church, around the mechanisms of royal patronage. He was extraordinarily intelligent, a fellow of the Royal Society, a friend of Isaac Newton and Robert Hooke, a man whose mind moved freely between mathematics, physics, astronomy, and design. He had visited France and studied the great Baroque buildings of Europe. And when the Great Fire destroyed Old St. Paul's, Wren understood, with complete clarity, that what London now needed was not restoration but reinvention. He began designing almost immediately. He submitted proposals to the Royal Commission for rebuilding the cathedral. His first design was rejected. His second design, a grand domed structure in the Renaissance style that Wren himself called his great model, was the design he loved most. He had a wooden model built, 13 feet high and 21 feet long, that still exists today in the crypt of the cathedral. It was rejected too. The clergy thought it looked nothing like an English cathedral. They wanted spires, not domes. They wanted something that expressed continuity with the English church's past. Wren found himself constrained at every turn by a committee of men whose aesthetic conservatism was at war with his own architectural vision. His fourth design, the Warrant design, as it became known, received the royal warrant of King Charles II in May 1675. Construction could begin. But here is the extraordinary thing. Buried inside that royal warrant was a single phrase. Charles II told Wren that he was permitted to make such variations as from time to time he should see proper. It was a loophole, a small one. The king and the commission almost certainly intended it as permission for minor ornamental adjustments. Wren saw it as something else entirely. He saw it as the green light he had been waiting for. And over the next 35 years, he used it to build a cathedral that bore virtually no resemblance to the design that had received the royal warrant. He did not make ornamental changes. He made everything changes. The plan changed. The structure changed. And most dramatically, the dome came back. The dome that the commission had rejected. The dome that the clergy had said was not English enough, not cathedral-like enough, not appropriate. Wren built it anyway. He built it so boldly, so confidently, so technically brilliantly, that it took decades for anyone to fully grasp what he had done. The dome of St. Paul's Cathedral is 365 feet high. It weighs an estimated 65,000 tons. And it is not one dome but three. Wren designed an inner dome of brick, the ceiling you see when you stand inside the cathedral and look up, painted by Sir James Thornhill. Above that inner dome is a hidden brick cone, invisible from inside or outside, which provides the structural support for everything above it. And above that is the outer dome, the lead-covered shell that defines the London skyline, the silhouette that ships navigated by as they came up the Thames, the image that appears on more postcards, paintings, and photographs than almost any other building in the world. No architect in England had ever attempted anything of this structural complexity. Wren consulted with Robert Hooke and Isaac Newton on the engineering. He invented new construction techniques. He solved problems in real time as the building rose. And when Parliament, in 1697, 22 years into construction, with no dome yet visible, decided that progress was too slow and withheld half of Wren's salary as punishment for the delay, Wren continued working. He was 65 years old. He was being paid half of what he was owed. And he continued. The final stone of the cathedral lantern was placed on the 26th of October, 1708, by Wren's son, Christopher Wren the Younger. The architect was 76 years old and had spent more than half his adult life on a single building. In 1711, the cathedral was officially declared complete, and Parliament finally paid Wren the back salary they had withheld for 14 years. He lived until 1723, dying in his chair at his London home on St. James's Street, having reached the age of 90. He was buried in the crypt of St. Paul's Cathedral, and his son wrote his epitaph, not in bronze, not in marble, but carved into the floor of the cathedral itself, directly beneath the center of the dome that Wren had fought for, lied for, and built against every obstacle the world put in his way. The words are in Latin. They read, Lector, si monumentum requiris, circumspice. Reader, if you seek his monument, look around you. Think about what those words actually mean. Wren is buried in the building he built. His tomb is inside his monument. He does not point you toward a plaque or a statue or a book. He points you toward the walls, the arches, the dome above your head. If you want to understand what Christopher Wren was, if you want to understand what he made of his life, what he sacrificed, what he defied, and what he built, you only need to look at where you are standing. That is the monument. That is the answer. Here is what I want you to sit with. Every single building we have looked at in this documentary was built against resistance. John Vanbrugh designed Blenheim Palace without formal training, survived the hostility of Sarah Churchill, survived the withdrawal of royal funding, survived being banned from the building itself, and produced one of the most celebrated Baroque palaces on earth, a building that Winston Churchill himself was born in and loved for the entirety of his life. Augustus Pugin poured himself into the Palace of Westminster with such ferocity, such total commitment, that it killed him, and what he produced stands today as the most photographed parliament building in the world. Colonel Thomas Blood walked into the Tower of London with a mallet and almost rewrote the security history of the British monarchy, and walked out a free man with a pension in one of the most mysterious royal pardons ever granted. And Christopher Wren, an astronomer who became an architect by accident and then became the greatest architect England ever produced, quietly built something that nobody had given him permission to build and dared anyone to tear it down. These buildings are magnificent. That is not in question. Stand at the edge of the lake at Blenheim as the mist comes off the water in the early morning, as it would have the morning John Vanbrugh first walked those grounds, and it will stop you in your tracks. Stand in the central lobby of the Palace of Westminster and look at the tiled floor, the carved stonework, the stained glass, every surface that Augustus Pugin designed before his mind gave way, and you will understand why people travel thousands of miles to see it. Stand in the shadow of the Tower of London and think about Colonel Blood in his clergyman's coat, walking toward those gates with a mallet hidden under his arm, and the crown jewels on a wooden shelf just yards away, and you will understand why history keeps returning to this place. And stand beneath the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral, 365 feet above you, built by a man who deceived a king and outwitted a committee, and look around. Look around, because that is what he asked us to do. But here's the question I want to leave you with. These buildings were built by extraordinary people. Some of them overlooked, some of them cheated, some of them erased. And they were also built in a time and by a system that we cannot fully separate from its darker realities. Blenheim was maintained by the wealth of a family connected to an empire that extracted enormous resources from people across the world. The Tower of London held far more than queens and traders within its walls. It held a history of conquest and coercion that stretched across centuries. The magnificence and the difficulty of history are never entirely separate. You cannot walk through these places and feel only wonder. Not if you are paying attention. Not if you are willing to ask the harder questions. So when you look at these buildings now, when you stand in front of them, or see their images, or think about the people who built them, what do you feel? Pride? Discomfort? Both? Leave it in the comments. We genuinely want to know. This is not a simple question, and there is no simple answer. And that is precisely why these buildings still matter. So we've been inside 5 of the most magnificent buildings in Britain. We've seen a palace that nearly bankrupted the man it was built to honor. We've seen a parliament reduced to ash by the most absurd act of bureaucratic negligence in history. We've seen a man flatten the crown of England with a mallet and walk out of a private meeting with the king as a free man. We've seen the designer of the most famous clock tower in the world die in a mental asylum at 40 years old, largely forgotten. And we've seen an astronomer turned architect quietly build one of the greatest domes ever constructed, against the wishes of a committee, against the wishes of Parliament, against the wishes of every reasonable voice telling him to stop, and then be buried inside the monument he built, with words that simply say, "Look around you." Here is what I want to know from you. Which of these 5 stories hit you hardest? Was it Vanbrugh, banned from the building he created? Pugin, the forgotten genius of Big Ben? Colonel Blood, pardoned for reasons nobody has ever fully explained? Or Christopher Wren, the astronomer who outlived every single one of his critics and left his monument to speak for itself? Tell me in the comments. And tell me this, do you think Augustus Pugin deserves equal credit alongside Charles Barry for the Palace of Westminster? Because that argument has been running for over 150 years, and it has never been settled. History loves to give the credit to the man who won the competition. But the soul of that building came from someone else. And if you visited any of these places, if you've stood inside Blenheim, or walked the walls of the tower, or heard Big Ben strike from across the Thames, tell me what it felt like. Because that is the thing photographs can never capture. The thing that stone and mortar, against all logic, somehow still manages to do. Before we go, if this kind of history speaks to you, the real version, not the sanitized version, the version with the complexity and the darkness and the human beings who paid the price for these buildings, the subscribe button is right there. We do this every week. And next time, we are going underground. Because beneath the streets of London, beneath the pavements you walk on every day, there are tunnels, chambers, and buried rivers that most people have no idea exist. There is an entire hidden city down there. And some of what is buried beneath London is far stranger and far more significant than anything you have seen in this video. We'll see you there.